Hi, folks. I got into astrophotography about 2.5 years ago. I didn't know anything about telescopes. I didn't know the first thing. Now, back when I was a teenager, and I'm about 60 now, 60 years old, I was into photography. I went to school. I studied Ansel Adams. So I knew a little bit about photography and long-term exposures. That's where you leave the shutter open for a long time, and that's the main reason why a point-and-shoot automatic camera will not work to get these kinds of images. What I learned in Kodachrome, and I worked in a darkroom for a bit, is that there's a thing called film speed, and that's basically the film's sensitivity to light. And that was called ASA in the analog version. And that's basically the same thing as ISO. So I had a jump start a little bit, but astrophotography is a completely different type of photography. It's highly technical, takes some serious commitment, and I'm retired, so I was able to spend all my time at it. And still, I mean, if I compare myself to some of the other guys out there, I'm not doing so well on most of my imaging, but I have taken some really good ones, and as you shall see. But with astrophotography, 90% of it is, maybe more, is processing. Maybe it's 99.9%. Because the eyepiece of the telescope, and I really don't care how big the telescope is, if you have something like a 100-inch reflector, like the Lowell Observatory or something, you might see Andromeda galaxy, like some of my images here, barely. But overall, it is the marriage of the digital camera with the telescope that gives you a Hubble-like imagery. And we really can do that. And you have to realize that Hubble is pretty old software. There's another thing you need to realize is that we do a thing called photometric calibration. And that's where we score our image with an online database that uses even space photography from Hubble, Gemini, Clementine, Horizons. It uses this database to score our image. It wants to know the exact time and declination of our image. To basically, and a local observatory, because it wants to get rid of the blue shift, the red shift, and any atmospheric anomalies that may be present in your image. So it gets rid of that stuff depending upon how good you shoot the image. And this has to do with a lot of things like tracking and focus. Now, tracking and focus is pretty serious. The Earth is moving very, very fast. It's spinning, and it's 1,000 miles an hour, and it's going around the sun at about 60,000 miles an hour. So you got to realize these things, and so anything. Now you can shoot the Milky Way at say 10 millimeter DX, 14 millimeter FX, up to about maybe 18 to 24 millimeter respectively, without tracking for almost 30 seconds. And you won't get significant star trailing. This is where the star is streaked instead of a nice little dot. And there's other little variances there too. DX, crop sensor cameras, DSLRs are better because of this refraction around the edges. So you have to get a special little lens, to calibrate for that, which doesn't work very well. It's better just use the crop sensor on your FX camera if you have a full frame camera, which I use. Okay, so, I don't know where to begin. I try to help people with this. What you're seeing now is a Batinov mask. That's for focusing. And every part of the sky focuses differently. Smaller stars, distant stars focus differently. You could say that the Earth's atmosphere is a really messed up lens. But when you're taking long-term exposures, you get a thing with the stars that they're bloated. That's called nubulosity. And you can see it. I haven't gotten in this image of the Christmas, that image of the Christmas tree nebula. The stars were bloated. I got rid of some of it, but I've got a program that costs $300, and you can see the nubulosity is pretty much gone out of this image of Orion. But then you can see a lot of nubulosity, and the stars are bloated. Now for the Horsehead Nebula, I've got to shoot about almost up to 3 minutes of open shutter, and about 30 of them minimum, and stack them into one image. So you can imagine putting several hours of data, up to even a terabyte or more if you really want to, when you get into narrowband imaging and H-alpha imaging, which we'll talk about later in some other video. God, there's so much to cover. But if you want the basics, it's not too bad. You can start with a lower end DSLR, as long as it's a DSLR, because you need those manual settings. You need to be able to control the f-stop independently of the ISO, independently of the shutter speed. Now, point and shoot cameras don't allow you to do that. There was only one made that would ever let you do that. I don't know about the P1000. It's a pretty nice looking camera, but still, you don't want to invest that kind of money if you want to get into any serious photography, because you want the interchangeable lens features. Anyway, so that's a picture of the last comet that passed by. That's one of my, now that one has an Astrocam on it instead of a DSLR. Now all DSLRs have infrared limiters in them, so they're not the best for astrophotography, nor is telephoto lenses. They're not the best, but you can still use them. The cool thing about lenses up to 300 millimeter or even more, and down to 100 millimeter, 50 millimeter even, is that you get what's called wide field of view, FOV, and these are astonishing when you get wide field, because you can see a huge portion of the sky, and there's all kinds of cosmic dust in there and color in there. In fact, very little of space is black, and it's all very colorful. And this Milky Way shot here, that's you shoot that in infrared with the color infrared spectrum. Now my Astrocam, God, I can't confuse you guys. It's entirely different. That's a wide field. It's showing a triangulum, this galaxy, and it's showing a star cluster near it. I've got one that shows triangulum and Andromeda in one frame. This is a skull nebula. It's called, I call it that. It's called the Rosette. There's one of my setups with a D810. I'm now using the D850, and that's the ZWO camera, the red thing. It's a 1600 times 36 millimeter sensor frame. A very expensive camera. It's got, now this image has been stolen from me. Oh, it went viral.